an Americans United webinar, I guess it was, that was just recently held, and just listen to how, like in the state of Missouri, which they'll probably be talking about, 15 politicians got up to further restrict women's rights. And yet, rather than thinking about democracy and equity, they chose to use scripture in order to base what they're trying to do, and how that's problematic for many of us who do not belong to that religious tradition in those way. I'd like to begin with some words from my colleague, the ethical culture leader, Hugh Morales at the Philadelphia Ethical Society. Hugh was asked by the Democratic National Committee to come and give opening words, and I thought they were great, and I'd like to share just a small selection of those. He says, "We know that our democracy is fragile and is being tested. You in this room carry the future on your shoulders. You lift up the fragile hopes and precious dreams of every citizen, young and old, of all colors, backgrounds, faith perspectives, or life philosophies. It is your work, wisdom, and integrity that will determine if our system of government brings out the best in all citizens. In these times of division, let us revive civic grace. May we always be inclusive and welcoming, opening to every person meaningful participation in our democracy. In particular, may we understand that those who say that politics is the art of the possible are aiming too low. We know that we must do now do more. We cannot just do what is possible. We must change what is possible. Only then will power and resources be shared more equitably. Only then will every citizen have the tools to become a leader. May we always see our history clearly so that we can build a just and noble future." I'll close with words from the educator and activist, Mary McLeod Bethune. "We have fought for America with all her imperfections, not so much for what she is, but for what we know she can become." So I want to thank you in that spirit of coming together and thinking about what we can become as a nation, and that a nation not just driven by our fears. I want to especially thank the Puffin Foundation, who local nonprofit who does so much not only locally, but across the world, for helping to support this gathering together. I also want to thank Americans United for separation of church and state. Any people here members of American United? If so, I ask more of you to look for that. Yeah, I'm so appreciative of that. And how long? At least 20 years. So before you were born, Brian, probably. So that's fantastic. And for lending us Brian today, and also to the Bergen County LGBTQ+ Alliance, who is helping to promote this event. Before we kick this off, though, we actually would normally have our joys and concerns when we talk about things in the community and our commitments and the things that we're recognizing, but we're going to change up the order a little bit. And I want to call up Mary Matsui, who'd like to introduce what we're going to do next. Mary.
Thank you, Kurt. Yes, we have still a big joy. Our society's joy this morning is that we're going to have our skills auction back this year. Yay! So it's going to be May 6th. That should be on your calendar. You can read about it in Facebook, on our site in Facebook. You can read about it in Focus and in our weekly newsletters. So you've been sent an invitation with an RSVP, really easy. Just move your mouse over the link, boom. You can RSVP. On another link, you can submit whatever you would like to offer for the auction. And that's, as you know, usually an activity, a dinner, a hike, a tour. We've got some really interesting offerings coming up, especially for the artiste in you. They can be things like cakes, lasagna, a biscotti, a household task. But lend even more excitement, we have got a special guest today to give you more incentive. We have a word from Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, about our skills auction. Sir, would you like to take the stage? Sorry.
Ah, gentles, join with me in my debate. To bid or not to bid? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the minds of men and women to stake a claim at skills auction or to sit home alone all year. To bid, and with a bid, break free from isolation. With that bid to say we end the heartache, the 1,000 natural shocks that COVID flesh was heir to. Hey, 'tis a post-pandemic consummation devoutly to be wished. But to dally, to pause, to doze and sleep, perchance to dream. Hey, there's the rub. For what dreams may come of those delights that we now miss, those dinners, hikes, those tours and treats that must give us pause, do we not bid? And there's the respect that makes calamity of dithering, of searching on the internet for things to do when you yourselves might your quietus make with a bare paddle, an upraised skills auction paddle. Who would such fardels bear? Nay, nay, join our merry life. Travel that undiscovered country on whose bourne so many skills auction treats will be displayed on 6th of May. Let not the native hue of resolution be sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. Support our skills auction. 'Tis an enterprise of great pith and merit and same-day rapid testing. Yes. And so lose not the name of action. Do as I bid. Make your bid this springtime. And with that word, I bid you all good morning.
Great. I was downstairs with our Sunday school. They're down there learning about Felix Adler and talking about deeds before creeds and going on about what kind of a community this is. You know, for us, our spiritual practice is community building and bringing people together. And so learning how to get people together and make that a possibility is so important to us. So I'd like to start with some opening words of what is ethical culture. This comes from Algernon Black, that many of you are familiar with and know these words well, but it's a kind of a statement of purpose about specifically about the ethical culture way of life. This is a call to the living, to those who refuse to make peace with evil, with the suffering and waste of the world. This is a call to be human, not the perfect, to those who know their own prejudices, who have no intention of becoming prisoners of their own limitations. This is a call to those who remember the dreams of their youth, who know what it means to share food and shelter, the care of children and those who are troubled, to reach beyond barriers of the past, bringing people to communion. This is called to the never-ending spirit of the common person, their essential decency and integrity, their unending capacity to suffer and endure, to face death and destruction and to rise again, and to build from the ruins of life. This is the greatest call of all, the call to a faith in people. And with like that, I'd like to call up our pianist, Rob Eigenbrod, who will give us those first selection of music.
So Valentine's Day is right around the corner, and I've chosen a song that hopefully might be easy to memorize and can bring joy and some romance and laughter into your homes on Tuesday. This is a little song, I'll do the chorus twice, well, that's the main part of the song, but maybe the second time, if you have learned the words the first time, you're welcome to sing along. This is from George and Ira Gershwin, Blah, Blah, Blah. I've written you a song, a beautiful routine. I hope you like it. My technique can't be wrong. I learned it from the screen. I hope you like it. I studied all the rhymes that all the lovers sing. Then just for you I wrote this little thing. Blah, 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 moon. Blah, 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 above. Blah, 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 croon. Blah, 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 love. Tra-la-la-la. Tra-la-la-la-la, merry month of May. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la, neath the clouds of gray. Blah, 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 your hair. Blah, 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 your eyes. Blah, 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 care. Blah, 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 skies. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la, cottage for two. Blah, 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 darling with you. Sing along. Blah, 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 moon. Blah, 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 above. Blah, 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 croon. Blah, 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 love. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la, merry month of May. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la, neath the clouds of gray. Blah, 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 your hair. Blah, 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 your eyes. Blah, 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 care. Blah, 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 skies. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la, cottage for two. Blah, 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 darling with you.
The joys of Zoom is learning to handle all of this various pieces of technology. So thank you, David, for rushing around doing all of this and making this possible. I'd like to introduce our speaker today. We're very happily joined by Brian Silva, who is the Vice President of Outreach and Engagement at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Yay. Your mom's in the audience. That's great. Brian brings to Americans United almost 3 decades of organizing experience rooted in creating change through education and advocacy that is intersectional, collaborative, and grassroots. After working as a high school teacher and mentor, Brian became a leader of the LGBTQ plus movement as the executive director of Marriage Equality USA, where he helped pave the way to legalize marriage for same-sex couples. Yay. And those words where all actions are personal. As an LGBTQ person myself, I'm very, very happy that hopefully somebody one day will find me beautiful enough to marry. Hasn't happened yet, but you know, I'm available, just putting it out there. Most recently, he worked to advance equality, equity, and justice as the executive director of the National Equality Action Team, NEAT, which he also founded. So this is one busy young man who decided to come in into our congregation and share something that's very important. And thank you for giving attention to Brian.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, between the bard and the bass, I think my job here is done. Didn't realize it was going to be such a wonderful show. Well, thank you all so much for having me. Again, my name is Brian Silva. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Vice President of Outreach and Engagement at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. For those not familiar with Americans United, we just celebrated our 75th anniversary. We were founded by religious leaders 75 years ago as a bulwark to protect the rights, primarily at that time, of religious minorities to not have to live under laws that violated their own religious beliefs by what was the majority religion at the time. Obviously, now we know that the separation of church and state protects all of us. And so it's a wonderful piece of, and a core piece of our democratic values in our country, and it's what allows us to live in the pluralistic democracy that we have, a place where we can all disagree on different things, but live together in community. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what our world, what our nation might look like if that wall of separation of church and state were to fall. And while I'm going to talk quite a bit about LGBTQ issues, for those not familiar, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. The effects of the falling of that wall would be felt quite far beyond. And so before I go on to say more, I'd like to show a very short video that our communications team put together about a recent lawsuit we filed in Missouri with 12 different faith leaders from 7 different traditions challenging that state's abortion ban on the grounds that it violates the religious freedom and the separation of church and state. To give you a little bit of a sneak peek of the words of and the actions of what we would start to look like if people were just being able to legislate their religion from within the state houses. Yep.
Life begins at conception. Psalms 119 says, your hands made me and formed me.
Being from the biblical side of it, I've always believed that life does occur at the point of conception.
As a Catholic, I do believe life begins at conception. That is built into our legislative findings currently in law.
Someone had mentioned yesterday that this is unconstitutional separation of church and state. Well, the fact of the matter is, I know of no greater way of affirming the natural rights of man than to declare that they are a gift from our Creator.
God doesn't give us a choice in this area. He He is the creator of life, and I, being made in his image and likeness, don't get to choose to take that away, no matter how that child came to be.
And what makes you valuable is that you equally share the image of our Creator. You are his work of art.
To me, life begins at conception, and my God doesn't give that option.
You have inherent dignity protected by the Constitution and inherent dignity provided by God.
I rise to offer an amendment ending in .18H. It has been distributed. I move for its adoption.
The only question I have is a rhetorical one, and that is how many of our constituents agree with the statement that God is the author of human life? That statement itself is in violation of the separation of church and state. It's an anti-constitutional statement in and of itself, and I ask the body to oppose the amendment.
Wait.
You want to turn the lights on? There you go. There you go.
That video is very disturbing. That video is actually a little terrifying. Because what you realize is that what they are doing is they are attempting to impose one narrow version of religious belief on an entire state of people. And that, and the further down the road that it can lead to, is what our country would look like if the separation of church and state were to fall and be overturned, which is why I joined Americans United a year and a half ago. It was not my assumed path of where I was going to be going next in my career, but what I realized is that after fighting for queer rights and the wider range of rights connected to that, the intersectional rights, that all of that would be for naught or lost or overturned if we didn't uphold the fundamental separation of church and state. And it's primarily under attack by a group of people that are often referred to as Christian nationalists. And again, often it's a white Christian nationalist movement, almost exclusively. And again, their goal is to impose their very narrow, restrictive, anti-LGBT, anti-woman, anti-equality, anti-diversity, anti-pluralistic democracy vision on our country, and try to couch it in a way that makes it seem like, but this is what the founding fathers always intended. Never talk about the founding mothers, strangely. So when we talk about church-state separation and religious freedom, our definition of that is very, very simple. It is the right to believe as you choose, to practice those beliefs freely, so long as it doesn't harm others. And it's that last part that Christian nationalists and many others like to leave off of the definition of religious freedom. So long as it doesn't harm others. Because if we allow religiously based court cases and legislation to go through, then inherently, as you saw in the video, we're going to start harming other people. There's no problem if you believe, your religious beliefs say that, you should not get an abortion, but that's not the religious belief of everyone. In fact, we have 12 faith leaders from 7 different religious traditions whose religious traditions either allow or sometimes require their congregants to get an abortion, especially to save the life of a mother or to preserve the health. And that's the full health. That's the mental health and well-being. That is the physical health and well-being. That is a decision between an individual and their physician and their family. So that is what we're fighting for, the right for everyone to believe as they choose, to practice those beliefs, so long as it doesn't harm others. So when we talk about how this is starting to affect, especially the LGBTQ community, there's a couple of different areas that I wanted to share some stories and some news about where that's happening. One of the primary areas where LGBTQ people are being attacked, and where we would see even more if the wall of separation were to fall, is in healthcare and providing appropriate healthcare for LGBTQ people. For those not familiar, there is a medication called PrEP. It is almost 100% effective at preventing the transmission of HIV. It has been around now for quite a while. Insurance companies cover it, many government programs cover it. A new lawsuit, I believe it's filed in Texas, similar to the Hobby Lobby lawsuit to allow private insurance companies to deny women access to contraception, would deny LGBTQ people, and actually any sexually active person. It prevents the transmission of HIV and AIDS in all, or HIV in all people, but would allow private insurance companies to deny access to that medication, thereby increasing the spread of HIV amongst the population. In states like Florida and others, they have passed laws and continue to try to pass laws that would deny medically appropriate care, especially to transgender young people and children. This also is the stepping on, parents' rights to be able to meet with their doctors, to be able to evaluate the appropriate medical care for their children and for adults as well, and then be able to make those decisions and choices. And this is a Christian nationalist view and idea about gender and sexuality. Make no mistake, that is where this comes from. It has nothing to do with what is medically necessarily appropriate. All the major medical societies and doctors' associations have endorsed all these wide ranges of medical or non-medical interventions to help young people grow up to be happy and healthy individuals, both whether they're trans or gay or straight. This is the government going in and making a religious judgment on what gender and sexuality should look like for all people, and then forcing parents and young people to abide by that. And of course, the tragic extreme consequence, especially for young people who, if they are queer like myself, are probably already dealing with bullying and feeling like an outsider and feeling attacked by the people in their school every day. And now you see your government and your elected officials coming after you. And this is why we see a tremendous increase in the number of young people reaching out to places like the Trevor Project and suicide hotlines, or unfortunately, sometimes not connecting with the help that they need and tragically taking their lives. And that is the reality, and that is the real consequence of the fall of the separation of church and state. When your medical interventions, your medical care, the people who are supposed to look out for you can't do that because the government is dictating from a religious viewpoint what medical care we all can or can't access. A Catholic hospital recently denied a trans man access to surgery to have a hysterectomy because it went against their religious beliefs. So we saw the Hobby Lobby case, which isn't explicitly LGBTQ, allows the denial of contraception to women. And more recently, pharmacists have sued to be able to deny dispensing things like PrEP, birth control, the morning after pill, and medication abortion because it violates their sincerely held religious beliefs. And when the wall of the separation of church and state falls, your individual religious belief, whatever that is, with no need to prove or explain, begins to trump all of our access to be able to live happy, healthy, independent lives, access to medical care. Because all of those things I just talked about, them suing to be able to deny, those are not LGBTQ medications. Those are the things that we all want to access. Those are things we all should be able to access. And we know it doesn't stop there. So discrimination in healthcare is a major area where our policy and our litigation and our outreach folks at Americans United work really hard to push and to fight back and to maintain that separation of church and state. Again, you could decide that contraception isn't right for you. You could teach your children that contraception isn't right for them. You cannot go into the public space and say contraception is not right for everyone. That is not our democracy. So another area is discrimination in the business world. I mean, I think we all kind of assume if you open a business to the public, you should serve the public, right? You walk into a store, you should be able to purchase something from that store, no matter what you look like, no matter who you're with. But businesses are targeting the LGBTQ community. And as somebody who worked in the marriage movement, it's very painful for me to see that where they're really starting and trying to dig into is attacking two people who love each other and want to celebrate that love. So we saw, the Masterpiece Cake Shop Supreme Court case, a couple of years ago. While it was found in favor of the baker, it was found in favor of that baker on a technicality. It wasn't found, the decision did not give them a license to discriminate unilaterally. But that case and the way the court, saw it, and that was before we have some of the new justices on the court. We saw where that's going. There's a case that was just argued at the Supreme Court last month, the Smith case, which was a woman in Colorado who wanted to be able to, wasn't even designing websites for weddings, wanted to start doing that, but wanted to be able to say, I only do websites for straight people, for heterosexual people. The Supreme Court heard that case, and I will tell you that it didn't sound great, what we were hearing coming from the justices on the bench. So we'll see what happens. There's a case out of Washington for a florist also wanting to deny services to same-sex weddings. And this argument that we can target specific people not to serve and couching it in the in our religious beliefs, our sincerely held religious beliefs. I mean, people are allowed to believe whatever they want, but at least in my Catholic upbringing, I never went to Sunday school and they said, and Jesus said, love everyone except for ... But the same arguments of using religion as an excuse, as a cover, as a shield to discriminate against people has gone throughout the history of our country. New immigrants back in the 1800s, my ancestors, Irish and Italian people, Irish need not apply, denying jobs, housing, other services to Black people, Hispanic people, to women, to Jews, to people of other minority religions. It is also the story of America. It is also the story of our country. And what is so wonderful about being here and with the Ethical Society is that, that change happens because groups like this come together and recognize that, as you were saying in the quote, it's not the America that it is, it's the America that we believe it can be, and the fighting, to do that. But what we can't allow is to slide back and allow this wall of separation of church and state to fall. And instead of these things that we have overcome partially and continue to push forward on racial justice and other things, to slide backwards and become entrenched and become protected in our laws because of this white Christian nationalist movement to impose their narrow religious beliefs on our laws. Another place where we see a lot of attacks on LGBTQ people is in employment. And two cases that I'll bring up before I move on to the last piece, which is Shelley Fitzgerald, who is a guidance counselor in Indiana at a Catholic school, was fired for marrying her wife because the school said that it went against their religious values. We've also seen in Florida the rise of these "Don't Say Gay" bills. That endangers teachers like I was. I was a high school history teacher. That was my first job. And people say, oh, this isn't discrimination. Well, if my straight counterpart stands up here and talks about what he and his wife did over the weekend, and I talk about what my husband and I did over the weekend, I'm violating that law and I'm putting my career in states like Florida and other places in jeopardy. It also sends a very strong signal to the young people in that school that this weekend is perfectly fine, but this weekend is not okay. And when students don't see themselves reflected in their classrooms, in their schools, when they see that their teachers are having to go back into the closet or are fired or worse, just choosing not to be teachers, then it is a huge impact on those kids, again, who are also oftentimes already feeling the most vulnerable, the most bullied, the most afraid, the ones most in need of seeing somebody that they can look up to that looks like them and show them that, it will be okay, like it gets better. The last piece, which has gone on for quite a long time, is discrimination in social services. We have two cases that we're arguing. One, Amy Madonna, who was a mother who applied to foster children, and she was denied, not because she was gay, but because she was Catholic. The Root and Ram family in Tennessee, also a big family with a big home and a big heart, applied to foster kids. Now, they're applying to foster kids through agencies that are paid for by the state. The state has decided that they don't have the bandwidth to manage the full foster care system, so they hire these other companies as contractors to provide these services to the public with your public taxpayer dollars. So it would stand to seem that the Root and Ram family, when they went to apply to be foster parents, would be a good candidate. But they were denied as well because they're Jewish. And they refused to sign a statement saying they would raise their children as evangelical Christians, as was required by the state-funded foster care service agency. So these are the things we're fighting today. And I guarantee you we will be here 75 years from now at Americans United continuing to fight. But if the wall of separation of church and state were to fall, that would make our job a lot harder. That would make these stories that I'm sharing with you today much more frequent. And it would cause tremendous harm to the most vulnerable in our community and in our nation. So I'm going to close out with an invitation, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, because I want to hear mostly from you all and what's on your minds, and share, as much as I can with what your interests are. And that is that in light of all of these attacks, both on LGBTQ people, on women and their access to abortion and contraception and the control of their own bodies, Americans United, from April 22nd to 24th, is launching our first ever National Summit for Religious Freedom, both in Washington, D.C. and virtually. And I hope that you all will be able to come, because it'll be additional conversations like this, tremendous keynote speakers and breakout sessions, and it'll be the hub of our collective organizing to push back against white Christian nationalism and the attack on the separation of church and state and the pluralistic democracy that we all love and hold so dear. So thank you so much for having me. I look forward to answering your questions.
So we said we'd start our kickoff by asking questions and learning, and there's probably things while he was talking that popped up into your mind. We're going to then allow you to ask questions. Now, a question is usually a sentence long and ends with with a question mark. Just to remind you what your school teacher taught you a long time ago. Greg Gordon is going to share how people can ask questions online. We want to get to as many people's questions as possible. Probably what we'll do is we'll call to voices even in this room who we haven't heard in a while, to make sure that they hear, and we'll do the same thing online. So Greg, do you want to tell people online how they can participate in this discussion?
Sure thing. Good morning, everyone. Most of you already know to raise your hand in Zoom in order to indicate that you wish to speak. If you aren't sure how to do that, or if you can't find it, click on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a tablet or a phone, click the three dots at the bottom right of your screen, and you should see it as an option. We especially ask that you not rely on physically waving your hand in the Zoom screen, for the simple reason that we may not see it. For those of you who are dialed in on a phone, remember that to raise your hand, you press *9, and to mute or unmute, *6.
So I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question. In 1983, yes, please, Steve. In 1983, I went to the Methodist home in Texas to apply start the process for adoption. And the woman figured out I was gay and told me that gay people could not adopt children in the state of Texas. So would you have been there? If that's a Methodist home, should that Methodist home have the right to tell me that I can't adopt a child?
Well, I will say, just personally, I think that any loving family should be able to adopt a child, regardless of any belief system or what have you. If that home is receiving public funds and is providing a public service, which is helping the state with managing their adoption system, then yes, I believe that you should have been. And what AU does is we actually have on our website, we didn't have a website back then, but On the website, we actually have a complaint report form that you can go and fill out, and we get hundreds of them all the time. That makes me feel great. It means people are using it. It also makes me feel sad that so many people are finding those experiences. So yeah, absolutely.
Great. And questions from the room? New voices? Let's try some new people who haven't spoken in a while.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much. What can any of us do effectively to keep this from happening? Because every time the president or any other politician ends their speech with "God bless America," I get really frustrated. I don't know why that should be allowed to be the conclusion of every speech. But on the other hand, like racism and separation of church and state, I feel so helpless as to what to do that would be effective. Can't just keep joining things.
No, I absolutely. And so the first thing that I'll share, which is the silver lining, is that the majority of Americans are still with us on the separation of church and state. Actually, I was just on Wednesday at a presentation about Christian nationalism. And I believe it's in the 20 to 25% of people like self-identify or self-sympathize with that. So the overwhelming majority of people are still with us. So that's a good thing. We're not trying to reconvince people that separation of church and state is a part of our democracy. So the first thing that you can do is to continue talking about it and supporting that concept with folks. I think that sometimes what happens is that when we don't stand up for our values, when we don't share that for whatever reason, that silence starts to give people permission to think, oh, just this little chip away is fine. Oh, just this one little thing will allow that to happen. So when we see things like, for example, the Smith case that was argued at the Supreme Court just recently, with this woman who wants to open a public business but not serve LGBTQ people, when we stand up publicly, whether on your social media accounts, whether it's here, whether when you're talking to folks and say that's wrong, that violates the separation of church and state. If you're going to serve the public, you serve the public. And I always challenge people, who sometimes say to me, oh, well, just go to another vendor. They can just go to another website designer. Just go do that. And then, my first thing is that you must live in a very privileged place where there's hundreds of website designers. But the majority of America, a lot of places there's one shop in town. And then the second thing I say is replace gay with any other group of people. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that's not okay. So speaking up as an individual really has a lot of power to stop bad conversations from going to worse places. And it's our silence that oftentimes gives people permission to think that either we agree with it or maybe it's this thing is okay to do.
Almost all the people I speak to already agree with this.
Almost all the people I speak with will already agree with this, so I wouldn't be converting anybody to this view.
Yeah. I will say it's not always about conversion, it's about maintaining. And I will tell you that in quiet rooms, people that you think are with you are on all of these different things. They may not be against it, but they're also asking questions. They're also asking questions like, well, maybe I don't think that trans kids should be able, I don't know. I just don't know. And so standing up and saying well, if you were a parent, wouldn't you want to be able to make the decision with your doctor and your child about how to take, oh yeah, all of a sudden it makes sense again. But our opposition is crafty. And a lot of what they do is they just try to make it, I'm just asking a question. Just look, I'm just asking a question. I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm just, and that's a very insidious way to get people who are supporters to start to think, well, I support it, but now it's just not in this instance, I don't support it. So now I went from 100% support to 95. And that chipping away is a very insidious way that our opposition tries to move the needle.
And we're going to allow for new voices, people who haven't spoken in a while, but because the president here, and then I'll pair it to Mary. All right. Mary.
I guess I'm just confused, or I'm always wondering how we got here, because it's such a small minority in the country that have these very extreme views. And I don't understand how they've been able to mobilize to the point where they're imposing these extreme views on so many people who don't feel the same way.
Yeah. The how we got here question, not to, it's probably more than we can get into with here. But, you know, I think one of the reasons why you see so many organizations across issues have now elevated saving democratic norms to a part of what they work on. LGBTQ organizations who now say democratic reforms, abortion, you know, organizations like AU, because you are right. The majority of people do not believe in Christian nationalism. They do not believe that this church-state separation wall should come down. But our democracy, our system of democracy, from gerrymandering to voter suppression, you know, all of those things have led to people being elected into power who do believe these things. And the system that gets them reelected into power is flawed. And so I think that has been a big way that we've gotten here. And part of the reason why it's incumbent on each of us to really push to make sure that voting rights and getting people to vote is one of the most important things that we can be doing year round.
We're going to take one more from the room, Anu, and then we're going to go and I'll make sure I get back to you too. And then we're going to allow people online to ask questions. Anu.
Thank you. I have two sort of related questions. You mentioned that there were like 12 religious leaders who went against the ban. What were those religions? I'm very curious. And I was listening to some speech 2 days ago on YouTube, and there was this mention that the number of people in America who are claiming themselves to be spiritual but not religious is increasing a lot. Like I think it's like 10% 5 years ago or something, and it's going 25 or something. Yeah. So is that helping this movement, or they are like standing off?
Yeah. So the 12 religious leaders in Missouri, they're from 7, I believe, different faith traditions: Episcopalian, Unitarian, United Church of Christ, Orthodox Jewish, Reformed Jewish. I know I'm forgetting a couple in there, but yeah, it's a wide diversity of organizations. We're actually working very closely with the Ethical Society in St. Louis and Mid-River. Yes. So they're not a plaintiff in the case, but with, you know, also kind of the non-theist, humanistic, but also atheist communities, you know, in support of the lawsuit. So, and then as far as, you know, the growth of people who identify as spiritual, you know, I don't have any like professional view or opinion on that. But I think some of what I have read is, you know, people are frustrated with the hypocrisy of organized religion, but they still feel a connection to spirituality. So that's their way of doing it. Whether it's helping our movement or not, you know, I can't say. We have supporters across all faith traditions, conservative, progressive, you know, across the range, because what we know is that the ability for anybody to practice their religion freely requires that everybody be able to practice their religion freely. And that only happens with the separation of church and state, where you're allowed to believe as you choose, practice as you want, so long as it doesn't harm others.
And we sent an amicus, I believe, early on saying that in our religion, ethics begins with choice. And therefore, if you're denying choice, we cannot practice our religion freely as well. We're now going to go online. I want to welcome some of our guests also from American United. And also to welcome the Ethical Culture Society of Silicon Valley out in California, who are in their pajamas watching this morning. But that's the way we should all do. We should have a pajama day. How about that? But I'm going to turn it over to Greg, who will moderate. We'll take 3 questions from online, and then we'll come back into the room.
So we have an online question. What is American United most concerned about at the local level, including school boards?
Well, I don't want to answer the what are we most concerned about, because I think it's our policy and legal teams would say there is no one thing, because they're all related. I will say some of the things that we are most concerned about. We filed a Freedom of Information request with the state of Florida when it was reported by a teacher that they were mandating teachers, new history teachers, to go to this training, which talked about kind of the the Christian norms of our country that we were founded upon, that the separation of church and state isn't exactly what what they say it means, and trying to really kind of gut some of the history of this principle and other democratic norms. So that kind of trying to indoctrinate teachers to really teach not history in the classroom is one really big thing. The other is book bans. We've been doing a lot of work and support on fighting book bans because almost it's like anti-LGBTQ laws, like almost exclusively, comes from a religious perspective. Not all religious people are anti-LGBTQ by any means. The vast majority have friends, family members, but those that are fighting against it often cite their religious beliefs as to why. And the same thing with book bans. A lot of, almost universally, the books that they want to have banned is because it violates some sort of personal religious belief of what they would want to read or they would want their children to believe. And that's the part that is the part right there that I think our opposition is trying to change, is that it used to be, fine, then don't read the book, right? The library is a place where the free flow of ideas is allowed and you choose what you want to read. And again, now what it is no, my narrow religious belief must be imposed on the library that serves all students or all community members. So those are two things that we are working on closely and definitely involved in.
We have a question from Mr. Richard Askins. I'll unmute you and please feel free to ask your question.
Sure. Thanks. It's been a very illuminating talk. Certainly some things I didn't know about, but I got particularly focused in when you talked about how the people on the other side of this issue would say, I'm just asking a question, and that you labeled it insidious. From my training, I find that just to be the Socratic method. And my question to you and comment is, if that method is being employed, why can't we employ it back, as in asking our own questions? Well, why do you make the assumption to believe in God? Or more narrowly, why do you believe in the assumption of that the Christian religion is better than other religions around the world? I think that's a way to push back in a mature way to what they're trying to do on that issue.
I don't think that there's anything wrong with trying to ask those questions back. I don't think there's anything wrong whatsoever. I think the difference is there's a difference between the Socratic method as a way to distill truths, distill facts, distill opinions, to kind of try to think of, open yourself into finding what you truly believe, and the method of this, which is there is an agenda of where they want you to come out at the end of the question. And that is not open inquiry. They are asking questions using language, bringing anecdotal pieces to try to create a narrative that leads you to where they want you to end up at. Part of the problem with the question asking is, and I think we see this across all issues, right? This bubble, that there is a bubble, and oftentimes Christian nationalists live in that bubble where everything that they hear is reinforcing what it is that they already believe. And everyone from mainstream media to think tanks to politicians to nonprofits work around the clock to try to pop that bubble or get into there in some way to be able to have conversations. It's a pretty secure bubble. It's a pretty tough bubble. And I think that the reason for it actually goes directly to what you said, is that if you were able to break into there, or break into there more freely, if it really was like, we don't have a bubble, freely exchange ideas with us, then arguments would fall apart pretty quickly if we were able to have, but they know that, they recognize that. And so it's difficult. It's not that what you're suggesting isn't a good idea. And we continue to try, as I know many do. It's just very hard to break into. It's very hard.
Paulo is our next question asker. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I guess it's actually probably not going to be much of a question. I just wanted to kind of agree with the point about, this rhetoric of saying, we're just asking questions, that it is really kind of a Trojan horse, because frequently not asking questions, they are making very explicit claims. And when you dismiss those claims, they completely ignore whatever response has been given. And it's just a way to just endlessly keep bringing up the same debunked ideas over and over and over again, because you can't ever close the door on anything, because it always could be some way and some possible permutation of things that it could be true. So we have to keep endlessly going over it again and again and again. So yeah, I appreciate your point on that.
Okay, we're gonna take another one in from the room. Yeah, we'll do 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Hi, thank you for your presentation and the work you're doing. It seems to me that there's sort of, in our Constitution, there's an inherent conflict, because separation between separation of church and state and the right to believe in whatever religion you want, because they always shield everything they're doing in the name of religious freedom. So you have like this, I don't know how to explain this built-in conflict, because they feel like they're crusaders on their end, and what they're doing, like, we have to give everything a pass because it's someone's religious belief, even if what they're doing is wrong. It's very, like, people that don't want to get vaccinated, for example, they say they can get an exemption because of their religious belief, but they're not getting vaccinated can have an impact on other people that they go to school with or work with, but they get a pass because it's religious belief. So I think the reason that they have so much power and they're getting away with it is because they can use that as a defense. And I don't know if you have any ideas how that can be resolved.
Yeah, the excuse me, the history teacher in me thinks that the founders of our country must have really liked conflict. 3 branches of government, adversarial, lawyer process in the courts, and things like that. The right to be free to practice your religion was a huge part of the founding of our country. But that at the same time, the ability for you to practice your religion can't then deny somebody else the ability to practice theirs, or the right of somebody who is a non-believer to live their life free of harm. And so I think, that is and has been the core conversation and battle, in our country. And, sometimes it has gotten hashed out in the halls of Congress, sometimes in the courts, sometimes not in the way that we at Americans United would like to have seen it, sometimes in ways that have been right spot on. I think what has changed is that besides the fact that we see elected officials, more and more kowtowing to this small minority of people, and some of that is because some of our democratic processes, have been turned up on their head. We also have a court that has really explicitly moved in a direction away from the separation of church and state. And we saw that especially in the Dobbs decision, that overturned Roe v. Wade. Talking of, I don't have it in front of me, but, Justice Alito's majority opinion and talking about all of these, standards and things that we were founded on hundreds of years ago. And it was like, what are you talking about? And so, we're in a place where the scale, while the scale used to do this, we're really seeing it go much, much farther to the right. And I think that's why the work of our organization and many others, we have a lot of great partners, is so important. Things like this are so important, that we're talking about it.
Right. Yeah, with 2,500 denominations in the United States and 17,500 plus churches, different churches in the United States, according to the IRS, where's the limits on that too, right?
I'm just wondering, why are we in such a confusion? Is it the ignorance on our part or the fear of unknown? Because we are brought up in certain way and with certain beliefs, and those beliefs get into very deep into in our psyche. And I think we need to be educated. We need to know the human nature, sexuality, etc., which I see that in schools they're starting to teach them. I see my grandchildren, they talk about it, and I ask them to know about it. So I think if there is some kind of awakening that we need to educate our people, educate the general population about, to just get out of your boundary, look and experience. There is other sides of human nature and respect that.
I think so much of what we see going on, and I don't want to say it's new, everything from racism to homophobia to misogyny. I mean, these have been around for forever. They're absolutely nothing new. But I think as our country has increased democracy, has increased equality and increased equity, those in power, those in majority who are shrinking, there is a fear, I'm going to screw up this quote, but as equality increases for those without it, those who have power feel oppressed, and I think they feel threatened. And so when the democratic process no longer works for them because they either don't have the majority in, for votes, or they're losing power to be able to corrupt, to take to buy the process, then they work to impose their narrow religious view on us through undemocratic means. We saw that in in Obama's Supreme Court pick that wasn't allowed Merrick Garland to go forward. We see that in gerrymandering, when districts are drawn and they look like giant S's as opposed to, when things like voter ID laws, when, banning people from handing out bottles of water to folks who have to stand in line. And why do they have to stand in line for 3 hours? And why is it only in districts where it's primarily people of color where this is happening? All those things to dissuade the democratic process from working. That all of those things, in all of those things that we're seeing, it is a power structure and people in power that are fighting back harder. And what that tells us is, one, we are winning. We are moving the needle. People are with us. Things are changing. But it also means that we're going to have to work harder. And I think that's, for us at our organization, that's what we see. That's why we're trying different things, filing the lawsuit in Missouri, doing, different outreach programs, we have a whole youth training program to make sure that young people grow up understanding that the separation of church and state is critical, because long after all of us are here, we need the next generation to be just as committed as all of you are in this room and all of you are at home.
We're going to take two quick questions, make it very quickly, and then we'll go to Lisa, and then we're going to go online really quickly.
Yeah, so I was just saying, well, the question is the thrust simply to ban religious rhetoric and argument in the legislative process, or to prevent the imposition of personal values upon legislation that affects others' personal lifestyle choices. So, or some combination of the two. In other words, is the protest against the imposition of personal values on a majority that are, quote, a harm to others' self-determination, or specifically personal religious values upon the majority that would have the same effect. And narrow views are not exclusively religious. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, the fight is to prevent one narrow religious view from being legislated on people in an entire community who may not share that religious view.
Brian, thank you so much for this talk. Just a real quick question. We may be moving in the right direction in terms of having the majority, and I agree with you about voting rights and working our asses off for that, which we've been doing here. But the real problem is the Supreme Court. And I'm wondering, I know it's not going to happen anytime soon, but if America United has a position on the expansion of the court.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have an official position on it, but I will say that not only is that something that I know we're evaluating, but lots of court reform things like the Supreme Court doesn't have any ethical guidelines. There's no rules that they have to follow. Things like that were also being explored as other potential options. So.
And Greg, we have time just for 3 from the Zoom world. I see there's 50+ people there. Just want to make that. So
We
Greg?
have one question from Karen. Karen, please unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Hi, Karen.
Okay, in getting ready for this, and I've been a member of Americans United for several years, I discovered that although the United States signed on to the International Convention for Rights of Children, we never ratified it into US law. And I'm in Oregon, and we had a problem with human trafficking, and as does everywhere else. But in order to protect the children, because this international rights of children is not US law, we had to establish in Oregon legally through the legislature that children have a right to be protected in order to protect them and go after the perpetrators. So I think that's also really a problem, and the extreme religious right and some of the cults, of course, don't like that children have a right to be protected.
Excuse me.
Thank you. Do we have another question online, Greg?
No other questions online?
Yes. Do we have anyone else with their hands raised? Or anything in the chat, Greg?
Nothing else in the chat.
Okay. Well, this is just the first stage. I want to thank Brian for coming out and doing this. I do want to mention a couple of announcements of ways that you can get involved. In fact, I'm happy he mentioned about book bannings. That's an example of how this insidiously taking place where people say, well, because I don't like this book, I shouldn't have to read it. We are having the Banned Book and Banned Humans Festival to remind us that it's just not books that are being banned, but what we're actually banning are the lives and narratives of other people. So not only will we do like we did last year, where so many of you showed up reading book selections, we're also going to be having speakers who are going to be sharing something of their own personal narratives, which are often the content of the things that get banned in other places. This, as I said, is part, and by the way, outside is this little QR code. We need lots of volunteers. This is how you can sign up, is to go and take a picture of this with your phone. And you know all how to do that now because you've ordered in restaurants. And then you can go in there and fill it out, and please volunteer. We have a great lineup of future speakers. next week. We've given first footing for Americans United. That's going to be followed by Freedom from Religion Foundation. The co-president of that, Dan Barker, is coming. He has a very interesting story. He was actually he was a Christian evangelist and traveled around the world actually promoting Christianity, decided that he had a change of heart, and he's coming here to actually now speak to us about what he thinks now about these types of situations. Dan is coming in the Saturday before, so next Saturday we're going to have a concert. He was a famous Christian musician who now does free thought music himself. So on the Saturday night before, which is next Saturday, we're going to have a concert in this room with Dan Barker. And what a treat that is to get him to come out and do a double whammy for us. And if you can't make it in the room next Saturday night, please come in on Sunday morning, and he will be talking of these issues. Now I'm going to turn this over to Sue. Do you have a question? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're going to be doing that. Don't forget. And we have a lot going on here at the Ethical Society and a lot of people to thank. We're actually going to have Ron Schwartz pass a basket real quick. We need to remember that we make these programs possible because of your generous support. And in fact, if you'd like to donate online, Greg, do you want to just mention how people can donate online?
I will put it in the chat.
Okay, in the chat is a link if you'd like to make a donation and support this work. We're going to allow for one more in-room announcement. Eric?
Thank you, Kurt. I'm here at the request of our Finance Committee because, as you see, we have so much good stuff going on, but it doesn't happen without your support. And so I'm going to be very right to the point. Our pledge drive is behind. Every year we put, here's our goal for pledging. And that's what keeps this going. And that's what keeps these fantastic programs available to all of us. So if you have not yet made your pledge, I beg of you, please get your pledge in as quickly as possible, because this is how we plan our year as a society. So, and I'll tell you, I'm going to make it easy for you, right? Everyone, all of our members should have gotten that letter and that request and the guidance about how to pledge and what to pledge and that type of stuff. I'm going to make it very easy. Pick a good number, right? I always say, don't give till it hurts. Give till it really feels good, right? That's where I want you to pledge. Pick that number and just send it to admin@ethicalfocus.org. And that's really all you have to do. And that's your pledge. We just want to make sure that your financial commitment to this society somehow gets registered so we can know how much to expect so that we can make our plans for the year. And I will also say, we do have some people who made pledges in 2022, and maybe you're a little behind. That's okay, but it's not too late to fulfill those past pledges as well. Thank you.
Great. And we have now a very special treat. We have another song in your program. You should have got the words for Mosaic, written by our very own Jesse Glass, who is
Sir,
here.
we actually have a hand raised. We have a hand
Yay,
raised.
Jesse. And we're going to now turn this over to Susan and Rob, who will be providing the music.
Thank you. All right. So we are going to be doing the chorus, the first verse and the chorus again. And please join with us. This was something that Jesse wrote pre-pandemic, and we had kind of gotten it going, and then COVID hit. And so we're trying to get it going again. So here we go. You may stand. Yes, get that oxygen flowing. Yes, yes. We stand together and the picture's clear. We stand together. It grows year after year. We stand together, but not as one. We stand as many, many.
Some bring a higher power and the mystery of that light, the blanket that will keep us warm through a long and bitter night. For some, the awesome mystery is the elegance of math. We're choosing human brilliance to guide us on our path. We stand together and the picture's clear. We stand together and the mosaic grows year after year. We stand together, but not as one. We stand as many, many, and we begun. Thank you. All right, that was awesome. Thank you.
And today, for our closing words, is to remember that this is Charles Darwin's birthday. One of my favorite quotes from Darwin is, "If the misery of our poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our own institutions, great is our sin." Thank you and have a wonderful day, and thank you for coming up.
Oh, no, sorry.
And those